The Sony FX30 builds on all of Sony's mirrorless stills cameras that also shot great video. But the FX30 puts the video focus first. And in this video, we're going to discuss some of my favorite and my least favorite things about the FX30. Let's start with the positive. The first thing I love about the camera is that there's a record light on the front of the camera and there's a large tally light on the back of the camera. And you can even make the screen have a red outline around it to show you when you're recording. I just love knowing that my camera is recording because I have really struggled in the past with actually having the camera recording when I thought it was. So all the visual indicators and being able to see when you're in front of the camera or behind the camera that's recording is fantastic. Another thing about the FX30 I love is that it has multiple record buttons. The record button on the top of the camera is really hard to miss. It's actually a bigger button than the other buttons. And they even pre-map the front button to record as well. So if you're doing talking head style videos, it's super easy to just reach over, press record, and start filming. Probably the biggest thing I love about the FX30 is that it has a built-in fan and unlimited recording time. This is definitely a video camera that's designed to run for a long amount of time. I've had some issues in the past with the A7R2 and A7R3 overheating after running them for a while. I haven't had any issues with my A7 IV, but I bought the FX30 so I could have a super reliable long form camera if I ever want to film for a super long time and not have to worry about overheating. That internal fan just keeps things really cool. I haven't noticed the fan noise at all while running it. The next thing I appreciate about the FX30 is the power button. It's on the left side of the camera, so it's out of the way of where you're normally gripping and holding the camera. Whereas with the A7 IV and the Alpha cameras, the off-on switch is right by the shutter button. So it's really convenient, but it could also get bumped at a time when you're not wanting to shut the camera off. On the FX30, you just get this really nice slider switch to turn the camera off or on, and it's hard to bump it on accident. The next super cool feature on the FX30 is extra quarter 20 mounts. You get 3 quarter 20 mounts on the top of the camera, one on the left side, one on the right side, and one on the bottom. 2 of the ones on the top are actually specifically for attaching the audio handle, which is also a super cool feature of this camera. And I love that you can shoot in portrait on this camera without having to use a cage, just by using the quarter 20 mount that's on the side of the camera. The sixth thing I love about the FX30 is the doors on the left side of the camera. The A7 IV doors are much improved over the A7 III doors. They don't dangle down quite as easily, but they can still be kind of annoying and get in the way. In the FX30, the way that the doors open is just super smart. They're easy to open and close, and they just work fantastic. Another thing I absolutely love about the FX30 is the built-in strap slots. So I don't know why they don't use this on every camera. Instead of having the protruding strap buttons, these are just built into the side of the camera, so it's perfect if you want to add a wrist strap or even a neck strap because it's out of your way if you don't want to use that. Or you can always just attach those little Peak Design mounting points on it directly to the camera as well, without having to use one of those triangle adapters. If you're enjoying this video, consider subscribing to my channel because we look at a lot of camera gear, tech gear, computer gear, and smart home gear, and we've got a ton of content coming out. Another thing I love about the FX30 is just how crisp the videos are. It uses oversampled footage to get that 4K image and just looks fantastic. The last thing I love about this camera is the 10-bit color options. Coming from the A7 III and also using the A6100 for a time, I really didn't have super high hopes for what the colors of this camera would look like, but they look good, not quite as good as my A7 IV, but they're super usable, and you're able to get a little bit of movement in post with it as well, even without shooting an S-Log. Now that we've talked about the things I love about the FX30, we got to talk about a few of the things that I've found to be really annoying about it. The first thing I immediately noticed is there's no exposure knob on the top right that can be locked like on the A7 IV. I'd map that dial to run ISO on my A7 IV. I find myself really missing having that locking dial. I'm just using the scroll wheel on the back of it instead, but it's not quite as easy to use, and there's no way to lock your ISO in place without assigning another button to lock your ISO. So I really wish it had that lockable exposure wheel like the A7 IV has. Another big gripe I have with this camera is that they don't give you a charger. I know the A7 IV doesn't come with a charger, and I know many of the Sony cameras don't come with a battery charger. They do give you a USB-C cord to charge it, and you can plug it into any of your MacBook chargers or just any standard USB-C charger, which is great. But if you're running a professional video camera, you probably have more than one battery, and you need to keep both of them charged. It's just annoying to have your camera plugged into a wall somewhere and then to swap out the batteries while you're charging it too. They do give you the bigger Z-type batteries that Sony's been using on all their pro-grade cameras lately, The battery life on this camera is fantastic. I just wish they included a charger out of the box instead of making you buy a third-party one or spend an extra $80 or whatever Sony charges you for the actual OEM charger. The next thing I don't like about this camera kind of builds on the dial, but it's just the fact that the button layout is changed over the Alpha series. It just takes a little bit of getting used to some of the custom buttons being in different places. The recording buttons are very handy on this camera, but they're also located in different locations than on the A7 IV. So I just find that sometimes I'm looking for certain buttons and they're not where I expect them. The main button that's really been confusing to me is the menu button on the A7 IV and other Alpha cameras is on the left side of the viewfinder. On this camera, the menu button is on the right side of the viewfinder, and it's just a mode button on the left side. So I find myself often hitting the mode button instead of hitting the menu button on the back of the camera because I'm still getting used to the FX30 layout. The next thing I don't really like about this camera is low light noise. Now don't get me wrong, there's some people that say this camera is terrible in low light. I don't think that's the case at all. I just noticed specifically more noise in shadow areas of my videos, even if stuff is properly exposed. It just seems a little bit more grainy. And again, it's still totally usable, especially on YouTube where people are watching primarily on their phones and not even at full resolution. But when I'm editing the footage, I just feel like it's not quite as crisp as it is when I'm using the A7 IV. I've also noticed more noise than I really care for at ISO 3200. I won't let it ruin a shot or keep me from getting a shot, but it's just not as good as on the A7 IV, where sometimes I go all the way up to 10,000 and I really don't even notice too much noise shooting in full frame. The next issue I have is actually with the top handle, and it just feels a little bit underbuilt. It's made of plastic, and the handle's also not as long as a standard top handle is. So you have to buy a kit from Small Rig that adds a little bit of strength and extends the grip of it. There's still a joint in the middle of the top handle that just feels a little bit weak to me, and I'm a little bit nervous about if I would break the top handle at some point. Another big issue I have with this camera is even though they give you a ton of quarter 20 mounts around the camera, they only give you one quarter 20 mount on the bottom, which means if you don't use this with a cage, you can actually still run into issues with the camera twisting on a tripod plate. I wish they would have given you two quarter 20 slots on the bottom so that you could put two screws in your tripod plate and not have to worry about it being able to wiggle. Another thing I'm still getting used to with this camera is the fact that it is an APS-C camera. I'm just so used to the full frame field of view, and also all my lenses are full frame. So I'm using my 24 1.4 G Master right now, and just composing my shot feels a little bit different than what I'm used to on my A7 IV. And it also makes me want to get some of those wider APS-C lenses, which is just going to cost a little bit more money in the long run to run both APS-C and full frame lenses. My last big complaint with the FX30 is that it uses shutter speed instead of shutter angle. Now, I don't claim to be a cinematographer. I'm not out here making movies. I'm making YouTube videos. But I would love it if you could set the shutter angle to be 180 degrees, and then you could toggle between shooting in 4K 60 and 4K 30, and you wouldn't have to worry about changing your shutter speed from 1/60 to 1/120. It would just do that automatically for you because your shutter angle would be set at 180. So there you have it. The things I really enjoy about the FX30 and the things that I just wish were a little bit different about it. Overall, I really like the FX30. I'm really enjoying using this camera and getting to know it. I don't think it's going to replace my A7 IV as my main talking head camera, but I am really excited to learn this camera more and to get to use it on a lot of upcoming projects. If you have any other questions about the FX30, leave me a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer them. Also, if you're interested in buying an FX30, I have links for it and all the video gear I use in the description below.